dealing with conflict. So what are we talking about here? First of all, we're the Institute of Applied Psychology. The purpose of us being in existence in many ways is to help people move beyond their normal expectations. We're a big fan of something that we call cognitive agility. Cognitive agility can be explained in many ways, but one of the key ones is that we as human beings respond to the world habitually. We learn a pattern of response to certain stimulus, and no matter what the context, we just tend to go with that autopilot. And a lot of time, it doesn't work for us. So in our mind, anything that sounds like tone, we might respond to with anger, or we might choose to withdraw, or we might take it personally. And we'll do that with our parents, we'll do that with our bosses, we'll do that with friends. And so really, we have groups of behavior that are responses to basically groups of circumstance. And so one of the problems with that is a habitual response doesn't take into account the unique context of the situation. So what we're really doing is we're never really in that moment dealing with what's actually in front of us. We're constantly referencing back to past experiences, and our brain says the equivalent of, this is just like when my dad used to. And of course, now we're projecting. We're projecting our old history onto whoever's in front of us. And in fact, that may not be what they're doing at all, but we have an open wound around that space. So the person that we're actually talking to, the person that we're dealing with, can get a response that has relatively little to do with them. It also means that, if we tend to be risk adverse, then we'll be risk adverse no matter what the circumstance. If we tend to be pessimistic, then we'll tend to be pessimistic when the pessimism is absolutely not appropriate. I'm going to say something that most NLP people wouldn't say, and that is that there are times when pessimism is absolutely appropriate. It's what's going to make you work harder. It's what's going to make you prepare more thoroughly because you're thinking things are likely to go pear-shaped. And the truth is, your response should be commensurate with the circumstance. If there's a really high chance that things are going to go pear-shaped, you're better off recognizing it and dealing with it. And the way you deal with it is you take action to mitigate the risk. So always being optimistic or always being pessimistic, neither one of those is good. It should be being optimistic where there's evidence and capacity to be so, and being pessimistic when it's appropriate. So what we're talking about here is having cognitive agility. And that way we can identify and we can amplify our strengths. We can run a pretty much sustained high performance environment, and we can negotiate the ever-present changing environment. And that's going to be significant in the next decade. So IAP basically enables you to unlock a compelling future. That's our aim. So who am I? Well, it's important that you know who I am. Otherwise, why the hell are you listening to me? So my name's Gordon Young. I've been the president of the Hypnotherapy Association as well as the NLP Board of Australia. I'm a clinical supervisor for a couple of associations. I have edited the Australian Journal of Clinical Hypnotherapy and Hypnosis. I'm a published author, director of hypnotherapist, and probably these final two are the most important to you, and that is that I was trained at the Milton Erickson Foundation in Phoenix, Arizona. This is the birthplace of NLP. NLP was largely modeled on a psychiatrist by the name of Milton H. Erickson. I was trained by his direct students. There was also something called the 100 Leaders Program. That program was the largest study of leadership in the Southern Hemisphere, to my understanding. You can download it as an app. I was over 100 different professions, and in this profession, when they went around looking for who they deemed to be the lead in the field, I was the one that they chose. So that's me. Well, let's look at what NLP is, because if you don't really know that, and obviously I don't know who you are and what your experience is, I'm going to say NLP is a set of skills, tools, and frameworks for optimizing your effectiveness across different contexts. So whether it's personal, professional, this is just application. Specific contexts like sport, sales, relationships, no matter what area of your life, NLP can help, because NLP effectively is a manual for your mind. NLP allows you to understand and model, in many ways model, because the NLP practitioner is basically a modeling exercise on the most effective people on the planet. What the creators of NLP did was they looked at who are the most effective people, go and find out how they do what they do. And there's commonality across all sorts of different areas of life. There's commonality. And those common patterns have been distilled down into what we call NLP. So it's very rare in that it's the study of success, not the study of failure. Most psychology is a study of the problem. NLP is a study of the solution. In our NLP practitioner, if we could talk about the context of conflict, you could basically break it up into 4 sections. Learning how your own brain works, and it's never what you think it is. I've never met anyone, including well-educated people, psychologists and like, who truly understand how the brain works and how you come to certain decisions. You need to learn how to read and predict others. This is where your ability to manage conflict will become even more important. You don't just have to manage your own self. You have to be able to predict and read behavior in others. Being able to influence with certain level of linguistic precision, and obviously the more advanced you are down the NLP line, the more you can do that. Because one of the few things we're in control of these days is our language. You can't take people outside and beat them up anymore because they don't agree with you. The good old days are gone. So we have to use language. And self-regulation. How do you learn how to manage your own mindset? And it's not just stopping yourself from getting emotional. It's really about how do you choose the most effective or useful way to respond to this particular circumstance? What's happening right in front of you? How do you choose to respond to this without going unconscious and kind of just putting it in the category of this is the type of thing that annoys me? And you're responding with that lead. So it's about becoming much more present, much more consciously aware of yourself and managing yourself so you can respond to things in a much more optimal way. So what's the context of NLP? I've got great concerns over the next decade. 84% of Australians disengaged in their jobs right now, according to a Gallup poll. 40% of jobs in Australia will be lost in the next 10 years. So 2005, they'd say more than 5 million Australian jobs will be offshored or they'll be lost to technology. So 40% of current jobs gone. And the trouble is they are not working class jobs, they're professional jobs. And if you can work remotely, then someone can work remotely from India. There's going to be a lot of change and a lot of flux in the next decade. And the most effective people, the people who are most employable, will be the ones who survive it. The people with more cognitive agility will survive it. Australia has the highest teen suicide rate in the world at the moment. And cyberbullying is a big part of that. We have to teach our kids how to manage their own thought processes. Just because you have an unpleasant thought does not mean it's the end of the world. You've got to be able to teach your teenager. If you're a parent, you need to know how to teach your teenager how to have a thought and not pay attention to it. Because ultimately that is the skills gap that most people have. Adults, kids, you name it. We have something like 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. They kind of argue that basically works out 1 per second. I don't know if that's really 1 per second, but it's a lot. The pivot point of our lives is which thoughts and feelings do we give attention to and which ones do we ignore? You can't listen to all of them. So which ones do you tend to listen to? If you tend to listen to the negative ones, your life will be full of worry and concern and upset. If you tend to focus on the positive ones, then your life will be very, very different again. But how do you decide that? Well, that comes down to the filtering system you tend to use. It comes down to your cognition and your agility. And 40% of people will suffer from a mental illness at some point in their life, according to the Australian Psychological Society. So 2 out of 5. There is a great need for a model or a framework that teaches people how to put aside whatever they're thinking and look for what they can do about a situation. Action is the answer to almost everything. So let's move on. So many people run this, I hate conflict. I'll do anything to avoid it. That is a huge problem. The fact that many people avoid conflict at all costs is a huge problem. And it's bigger than you might think. Conflict avoidance leads to and reinforces a skills gap of avoidance generally. So avoidance is a tendency. There's something called an avoidant coping style. Whenever there's a problem, you want to look in another direction. If you do that habitually, there's a deadline, you ignore it until you're pushed, right up against the wall, then you'll take an action. That's avoidance. You don't feel like doing something, so you don't. There's a problem at work, you don't deal with it at work, you come home and complain about it. Or you come home and you drink a bottle of bourbon. You come home and you eat, Macca's and Ben and Jerry's and a whole bunch of other things, and that makes you feel better about the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem. So avoidance, unfortunately, builds a skills gap. And the more you do avoidance over your life, the more the skills gap widens because you don't have any history of tackling a problem head on. So the avoidance is kind of self-fulfilling. As you start avoiding problems, and this is saying that you've been taught, you learn how to do this, then you never develop the skill set of actually tackling something. If you are conflict avoidant, it means you're always going to be at the mercy of any kind of conflict or confrontation situation. You're not going to be able to manage it. And as a result, there's a whole bunch of things you won't be able to do. So, for instance, your self-esteem will plummet over the decades because you don't stand up for anyone or anything. You can't stand up for yourself because you can't set a boundary. You can't set a boundary because you can't defend it. There's no point saying to yourself, I'm not going to do that extra work anymore. They can hand it to someone else. If you know the moment they go, oh, but please, come on, you did it for Ted the other day. Oh, okay. The moment you do that, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're going to develop an excessive need for validation from external because you can't validate yourself. You've got no history of achievement. And whatever achievement you have developed or come across, you'll tend to negate anyway. You'll tend to be risk adverse because you're so concerned about the danger of people not liking you or not feeling good about you that you'll tend to become timid. And it's problematic. A lot of people think your self-esteem creates all this. I'm going to say avoidance tends to create all this, and conflict avoidance in particular. It's also a series of skills gaps. So if you can't manage your own emotions, why do people really avoid conflict at the end of the day? They tend to think, they're concerned that they'll overshoot, so they'll go past assertiveness and go straight to aggressiveness. They're worried they'll lose it and go ballistic. And the other option is they'll undershoot. They fear they're going to go emotional and they'll be seen as weak. I notice this a lot with women I see through my clinic. They're worried that they'll break down and cry. And then in a corporate environment, that's just really not appropriate. So they don't go and have that conversation in the first place. So those are the two most common blocks. And both of those speak to the fact that you don't really believe you control your own emotional state. If you're worried about that, then you are hoping it doesn't happen. You're not recognizing that you decide whether it's going to happen or not. And that is an underpinning of NLP, to teach you how to manage and run whatever mindset you want. So what are the suspect 7? These are the skills gaps for people. They lack compartmentalization skills. Compartmentalization is the inability, or lack of compartmentalization is the inability to park a thought. When you're lying there in bed and you can't get to sleep, you're probably running poor compartmentalization. When you're just running through the day or worrying about tomorrow, it's compartmentalization gap. An inability to make a realistic self-assessment. So if you can't really assess your own value, your own skill set, then you're going to rely on other people. And if you rely on other people and their validation, then you're not going to stand up to other people when they overstep the mark, because you're kind of in need of their approval. So it's going to be a problem for you. Your inability to assess risk realistically. Why is that a problem? Because you see catastrophe. You don't want to go to a conflict situation because you're worried about it going terribly pear-shaped. And as a result of that, half the time, what you worry about is very unlikely to happen. It's just not going to happen that way. People aren't going to escort you off the grounds, escort you out of the office, under security. You're not going to be marched out with your little brown box of stuff. That's not typically what's going to happen, but that's where most people go. And the inability to recognize what feedback is worth listening to. Just because you get feedback from another person doesn't mean to say it's valid. But if you have a desperate need for validation, you're not going to be able to discern it, because you don't have enough self-assessment to give it a context, to compare it with your own version of facts, your own version of how things are. You need internal validation and external, but you need a balance. And if you don't have that balance, then you're relying on other people who by definition have their own agendas. The inability to self-manage, and I come back to that same point again. It is crucial from an NLP perspective that you control what you can and you let go of what you can't. You don't get to control anyone or anything. You don't get to decide what they think of you or what they're going to do. The only place you have control is within you, about how you respond to any of it. And NLP is all about giving you a whole bunch of devices, tools, and a framework to actually decide that for yourself, rather than your history and your conditioning deciding it. The inability to recognize the individuality of the context. So to not recognize in this situation what's actually happening here, and park all those projections from previous episodes. Often these episodes from other people are from other people, they're not from this person. So ultimately, is the lesson from the past actually valid here? You may have had a boss that bullied you in the past. The moment you run the lesson in your mind that bosses tend to, or authorities tend to bully you, you've generalized that lesson and it's no longer valid. That boss was a bully. But to suggest that all bosses are bullies, then now we're in a difficult and not so helpful space. You cannot generalize the lessons a lot of the time. And the inability to tolerate ambiguities of life. All anxiety really is translated, is the inability to manage uncertainty. That's all it is. You're only ever afraid of what you don't know. Whatever you know doesn't worry you as much. It's always the unknowns that concern you. So the larger gaps are this this habituated patterning tends to get in the way of cognitive agility. And they are large patterns of conditioning. So if you already had NLP and we were talking about conflict management, I'd be talking about linguistic pattern interrupters, embedded commands, run-on sentences, quantum linguistics, ways of of diffusing a conflict pretty readily. I'd be talking about anchoring your boss or your colleague or your partner or your kids or whoever else it is to positive states so that when there's difficulty and when there's challenge, you can fire off the anchor so that it tends to diffuse that situation. I'd be talking about strategy elicitation, how to choose your most useful and context-specific emotional state. So the question might be, is this personal? Should I take this personally? Or is it just something that affects me personally? How do I choose how to respond? And do that in the moment, not the next day, which is where most people really can do it when they've calmed down. And building unconscious rapport levels. It's very hard for someone to attack people when they appear to be very much like them. People are much more willing to attack you when they seem to be unlike you. So in the absence of NLP, this is what I can give you. Simple basics. Here's a thought for you. You train people how to treat you. You need to recognize and own your own contribution to any conflict situation. For example, you might lack the ability to set a boundary. You might be unwilling to stand up for yourself. Your response to anger might be to become timid or withdraw or sulk or whatever, and that could actually amp up the aggressor. So people who are aggressive tend to choose their marks. They don't do it everywhere with everyone. So how are you going to manage it? The starting point is control what you can, and that is your own response to it. Sometimes I talk to people, I've got, maybe couples come in, and one partner will say, look, I'm not the one who creates that. They get angry with me and I'm only responding. And a lot of the time, the response is to just withdraw or to cry or whatever. And I will say to them, no, you're part of that. Because the moment your response gets put out there, the moment you didn't say to that person, I'm sorry, but this is unacceptable to me. I'm willing to listen to your concern, but I'm not going to be spoken to in that way. So if you're going to speak to me like that, then I'm leaving. If you want to speak to me as an adult, then yes, I will listen to your concern. And if they keep going at you, you leave. Right there, you're setting a boundary, but you can't if you run avoidance. If you're so determined and so reliant on the approval or validation of the other person, it's going to be very hard for you to do. So when people say to me, they've got nothing to do with it, the other person, the aggressor, there's always the dynamic between you. That's the problem. The fact that you don't stand up, you don't set the boundary means that they've got to keep pushing up against whatever boundary it is. And maybe the boundary is where you shut the door and you lock it in the bathroom crying. And that's where it kind of finishes. Or, you leave and get in the car and you drive off. Or you drive off for hours, you come back and it's all calmed down. And instead of talking about it, you pretend nothing's happened. That is a problem because that's a festering sore in that relationship. So you train people how to treat you. Let me show you something quickly. And I spend like an hour and a half on this in the NLP practitioner. I can only spend a couple of minutes here, but there's something called the drama cycle. Now, it's not actually NLP, it's pre-NLP, but I think it's a really crucial model. In this model, there are three basic positions. There's actually a fourth position as well, but I'm not going to go there right here. There's something called the persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim. The victim is the person who's constantly being bullied, having problems. The two main weapons are guilt and helplessness. They make you feel guilty, and that's how you help them. They guilt you into it, or they're so helpless or hopeless that people who are rescuers in particular are going to look for them and try and help them out. A rescuer is always looking for a victim because a rescuer gets significance out of helping others. There are whole fields, whole industries where rescuers are the norm. Then there's persecutors. Persecutors are basically the office bully, the school bully. Every one of us does all of these at different times. The moment you've got tone, you're in persecutor. The moment you sulk or you refuse to talk to someone, the moment you're seeking to punish, the moment you are punitive, you are in persecutor. So if you play one, you play all. But in a conflict situation, there is a vying for position between persecutor and victim. The way when we're being attacked by someone, they're choosing to be persecutor. If we become the victim, it's because we opted out. We withdrew or we fought back, but we accepted that we lost the situation. We're in the victim mode. We don't have control. The truth is, the way arguments mostly go is that each one, because in this drama cycle, no two people can be in the same spot at the same time. If I'm victim, then I kind of force you to be either persecutor or rescuer. If I'm rescuer, I kind of force you to be victim or persecutor. If I'm persecutor, I'm aiming for you to be victim. Rescuer, maybe, but really victim's where I'm pushing you to. I need to bludgeon you into submission. Well, the only way to out-persecute a persecutor is to go harder than they did, which is where conflict escalates and tends to expand. So you get tone from someone, you launch with more tone back. You're actually playing in this drama cycle. This explains 98% of human behavior, in my view. I show this when I go into corporate structures, and everywhere I go, people go, oh my God, this is exactly what we do. There's also a fourth position, which is the observer position, which is like an adult position or a coaching position that can step out of this, because this is all driven by drama. The more you spend time in the world of small things, the drama of life, the hostility. I can't believe they said that to him. Did you hear about this? All that kind of crap that people occupy their minds with helps you step into this drama cycle. When you're watching a reality show where the underpinning to the whole thing is conflict, then you're watching the drama cycle. Drama is currency in this community. And unfortunately, it occupies a lot of our time. So often what we're doing is we're seeking to out-persecute the persecutor. And in the end, one of us is going to win or we both withdraw. Now, sometimes someone else will come in as the rescuer and try and smooth things over, or they'll try and help the victim in some way. Sometimes the rescuer is a parent, sometimes it's a sibling, sometimes it's a manager or a colleague. But this drama cycle is played out anywhere there's more than one person. This is the basis of conflict. So with that in mind, the second piece is that you need to recognize your own power and own that. Nobody can make you feel anything negative. Here's a starting point. I can't make you love me and I can't make you hate me. You can say whatever you like to me, but you don't get to decide how it lands. You can attempt to be punitive and make it personal, and you still don't get to make that choice. I decide how something lands, but I can only do that if I've got the technique to do so. Nobody has leverage or power over you unless you give it to them, right? People talk about someone has power. No, only with your compliance do people control you. I don't have control over my 6-year-old. Unless I choose to pin her to the ground physically, I can't make her do anything. I have to negotiate, often for much longer periods than I would like. I have to coerce, I have to do whatever, I have to come up with something. But ultimately, I don't get to control her. And the idea that I do, or the expectation that I should, is erroneous. Ultimately, the power we have is within us to manage us. You can say whatever you like to me. I'm the one who should be choosing whether I take it on board or not. And for many people, they can't make a distinction between what affects them personally and what's truly personal. Now, let's say you swore at me and you called me names, whatever. At the end of the day, does that really say anything about me? It might, but it also might say something more about you and where you are at. And so at the end of the day, I can choose which way I interpret it, but only if I've got the tools and skills to do so. There's something else called pattern interruptions. In a conflict situation, it's a great idea to interrupt the pattern. The classic pattern interruption is the slapping of a hysterical person, like on Flying High.
Mayday, what the hell is that? Mayday? Why, that's the Russian New Year. You know, we have a big parade in Bookstore.
Stand it anymore. I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Just let me handle this.
I'm gonna get out.
Calm down. I'll get back to your seat. I'll take care of this. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Do you want another phone?
Sister, please, I'll handle this.
A little exaggerated, but you get my point. How do you interrupt the conflict situation? How do you get in the way? I'll give you a really good example. It was one of my graduates. He was already a corporate trainer, and he was looking for ways of interrupting. He was actually interrupting whole industries when he was part of our group. But he was at his kid's soccer match, and I thought it was a wonderful story. He was at his kid's soccer match. He was like, I don't know, 7 or 8. And this child from the other team was really hacking into people, like tripping them up, kicking them. And he called out and asked the ref to stop this. You know, this child was out of order. And this child's father was 20 meters, 30 meters up the line and took offense to Nick, was his name, Nick's protest. And the guy was huge, apparently. And Nick is more of a thinker than a physical type of guy. And this huge man started walking towards him in a very threatening manner. And Nick, having learnt rapport with me, decided, well, okay, I need to match what he's doing. So he starts walking towards him in a threatening manner. And then he suddenly stops when they got within 2 meters of each other and starts going, do you smell dog poo? And he starts looking at the bottom of his feet, at the bottom of his shoe. And the other guy stops and he starts looking at the bottom of his shoes too. And then he's just stopped this guy and then he says, look, all we want is the kids to be safe and have a really fun time here, yeah? Let's just make sure everyone stays safe. Now, I don't know if you noticed this, but that's an embedded command. And the guy calmed down and stopped and Nick walked away. And I thought that was brilliant. Nothing interrupts someone like the idea they might have dog poo on their shoe. You know? The other element is being the one. There is a power in being the most indignant or the most hurt or the most something in the room. If someone, this depends a little bit on what the conflict is. Let's say it's a complaint, a customer complaint thing. If the customer is indignant, your job is to be more indignant. If someone's complaining to you about something, they're expecting you to fight back. I'm going to suggest be more indignant. They're angry. They're saying you sold me the wrong thing, and your response needs to be, we sold you wrong thing. That is terrible. That is totally unacceptable. I cannot have that. Now, the truth is, you have no idea whether they've got a legitimate complaint or not at this point. But what you need to do is be more indignant for them than they are, and then they have nowhere to go. This is true for being the most hurt person, the most whatever the person's bringing to you. You need to be the one that takes that space from them. Does this require a level of skill? Yes, you cannot be combative with your language. You need to be on their side until you investigate the complaint. You may or may not find that it's valid. But at the starting point, you need to calm them down so you can even take the time out to investigate. You can also reframe it. One thing you can basically say, there's positive intention, according to an NLP perspective, there's positive intention to every behavior. Well, if someone is complaining, then effectively they care about a better outcome. That's what they're looking for. I can tell you now, when people no longer care about an outcome, they're not complaining anymore. They're done. They don't have skin in the game. So I frequently teach in customer service, the mere fact that someone has energy in their complaint is a sign that they do want to see things improve. So you could ask this question. What I see is that you just want to make things better, do you not? Now, again, if you've got any NLP background, you would recognize right there that there is something called a tag question. A tag question is a device to get someone to agree with you. Notice the difference. What I see is that you just want to make things better, compared to what I see is that you just want to make things better. Do you not? And you must inflect down. It's all in the tonality. You must inflect down on do you not, because downward inflection invokes a command. You can pre-frame it. One thing I would say to you is before you start to communicate in a conflict situation is that you establish what you want out of the exchange. If you let your emotions run the agenda, effectively your emotions typically seek to guilt people or bludgeon people into a position. If you let your emotions run, typically they're going to basically run the, look what you're doing to me. You're hurting me, you're making me angry, you're making me something. That isn't terribly useful in most professional contexts. But if you were to ask yourself, what I want here is to see a change of behavior in my colleague or my team member or my child or my whatever, you stay focused on securing the outcome and you don't worry about the past, you focus on the future. Park the past. Yeah, I get that. I don't like the way things are behaving, but let's put a line through that and let's look at this now. What can we do to improve? How do you see a way for us to move forward? And you keep it positive and you keep it out of the drama cycle. So you set the frame. Whoever sets the frame controls the negotiation or the discussion. So we're almost at 40 minutes. Do I have questions? Let me try and see what I can get there. My mouse isn't working on the... There we go, chat. Let's go back. So, do you have questions you want to ask? Now would be the time to do so. Yes, hi all. Okay. Well, if there isn't, oh, sorry. Would NLP be enough to be a life coach? It depends. It's a good question. It depends very much on the training. There is a lot of trainings out there that claim you automatically get a coaching certificate with the NLP. NLP is a wonderful skill set, but it doesn't necessarily give you a coaching framework. The way we do it is you do your NLP, because that's all the change technology. It's understanding people. It's being able to have a conversation with people. And then we run a separate model, although it's not a massive, it's 4 days, blended. So we have a lot of online material, and then we do 4 days of practical work where you learn an actual structure and model for goal setting and for running a valid coaching model. Usually they're about 12 weeks long. So I'm going to say, in conjunction with some other things, I don't know how I would coach without NLP, but just doing NLP doesn't teach me how to coach necessarily. It doesn't, and I think the coaching needs to have structure. Good life coaches are very structured because their clients are not. That's the reason why they need a coach. Yeah. In a volatile situation in family court. Well, again, I can only talk generalities. I have had people come to see me who had to keep calm knowing they're going to family court and just didn't know how to control their emotions. And in the end, they won the case based on the fact that no matter what, they were unflappable. You have to ask yourself, how do I do indignation? How do I do anger? How do I do frustration? The starting point is that you deem things are right or wrong. And right there, you're lost. Right? At the end of the day, everyone's right from their perspective. People don't generally run a position of, I know I'm completely wrong on this, but I'm going to stay with it. From their perspective, they will run justification. But here's the thing, we're not logical creatures. We will run justification as mostly based on emotion. So we'll look for the evidence that supports our case, and we will minimize the evidence that you run. So most of us have a need to be right. And I don't think that's just ego. I think that's just feeling safe in the world. If I feel like I understand the world, then I'm safe. Yeah. But in a family court situation, there's all sorts of meaning and attachment to someone who tends to lose the plot. It's important to let someone else do that and not you. But you need to have the skill set to do so. At the end of the day, you've got to remember to stay focused on what your goal is. Like I said in the last slide, what do you want out of this? If it's to show the court that you've been badly treated, then you might run the emotion. If you keep your eye on the prize, which might be a custody situation or whatever else it is, then you need to be unflappable and you need to stay with the facts, because courts are about process as much, well, that's what they try to be anyway. What's the difference between NLP and hypnosis? NLP is a almost conversational form of hypnosis. NLP, a lot of the language of NLP came out of, and a lot of the self-regulation piece of NLP came out of modern hypnosis, which is the Milton Erickson Foundation stuff. So they are linked, but NLP has a broader application. Hypnosis, usually there's a distinct induction, but the NLP you can use in a business sense, in coaching. I run NLP technique pretty readily through most coaching models, and I can do that in a corporate structure, and no one's going to think much of it. But if I was to actually do a hypnotic session, and I do that as well, but I'm known for that, it may not be considered as appropriate in some contexts. NLP, if you get really masterful at it, people won't even know that you did anything, but they just will feel better having spent time with you. Or they will suddenly feel resolved, and they might call you the next day and say, I don't know what happened, but I now feel like that wasn't important. And they may not have any clue that you had anything to do with it. And that's one thing I love about NLP. Hypnosis is usually more overt, but NLP can be quite covert. And unfortunately, that also means that it can be used for not so good intention by some people, but it is a very powerful tool, and it significantly amplifies your capacities. The likelihood of you, if you're really effective NLP, say master practitioner, the chances of you being beaten to a promotion would be relatively slim, I would imagine. Or the chance of you being unemployable would be virtually zero. You would tend to leapfrog most people with their skill set. I went from having no skill set in the area whatsoever, quite frankly. No one ever came to me for wisdom or knowledge, to charging $3,000 to $5,000 a day for my services, plus expenses. Ultimately, it is a rare, despite the fact it's out there a fair bit, it's a rare skill set, and it's also rare because most people don't learn it very well. There's nothing stopping anyone setting up an NLP school. It's really important, you guys, if you're looking for NLP, that you really do your homework, because there are people out there calling themselves NLP practitioners or trainers. There's nothing to stop anyone putting that name after putting that title after their name. And the only time you'll realize that they're not so good is after you've been in the training and you try to do those things, what they've taught you, out in the real world, and none of it works. That's when most people realize they've made a poor investment. And we've certainly had people retrain with us, having spent a lot of money in other places. In fact, we've got one guy who's working with us now, but he did all his training somewhere else. He's having to do it all over again. He's here helping us, on the phones, because he sees that it's important that people train in the right place. So there's NLP and there's NLP. There's personal trainers and there's personal trainers. There's, in every field of life, there can be a wide range of skills and knowledge, and you do need to learn from someone effective. Safety is vital, and yes, you get that. It's okay to. Yes, I think ultimately, yes, you've got to maintain safety. I mean, I'm talking very generally here. Are there times when you just need to avoid? Yes. Again, cognitive agility is there's times when you should just avoid and stay away from something. And other times we need to stand up. There's other times we need to walk away. The key is, how do you do that? And often you need to create choices for yourself. And NLP is all about choice. If you need that job desperately, my question is, why? How have you managed your finances over the last decade and then ended up in a situation where you can't go 2 weeks without a job? The more you have choice, the more you don't have to put up with crap from anyone. And I would always encourage people, whether I'm coaching them or in my courses, to minimize their reliance on other people. We're all interdependent, but we can cut back on our reliance on others. And that way we have the choice. And it changes the frame. When you know you don't need this job, that you can go get another, your boss can do whatever you like, whatever they like. I recently had someone in a course, and they were saying how despite all the extra hours they'd done, when they came to do the course, even though they gave the company, I think, 6 months notice that they want to take off the Friday and the Monday, the company decided not to give it to them. They just said, well, I'm taking the days off. In the block between the two NLP modules, she was headhunted, and when she was getting the dressing down by the manager for having taken the days off, her response was, fine, I resign. End of story. Choice is everything. Mm-hmm. Do you need to train in both NLP and hypnosis skills? It depends on what you want to do. NLP is much more for general. If you want to be a great practitioner, as in a therapist, then you would definitely do the hypnosis as well. Because people Google search hypnotherapy much more regularly than NLP. There are people out there trying to be NLP practitioners by itself. I think that you can, but NLP has a wider range, but hypnosis is a different skill set again. and we go much more after people's cognitive positioning. And that is something that can be addressed more at the hypnosis level with a deep trance type space. And, you know, the evidence is starting to come in from Harvard and Stanford and Yale and those sort of places that this is the way to go. So the combination of NLP and hypnosis, I wouldn't swap that skill set that I've got for anything that's come through my door. I've had, you know, PhDs of psychology, and I still wouldn't swap the clinical skill set. They have enormous knowledge base in other areas, but as far as working with people, that training doesn't always give them the best. So we train everyone in this area, and I've never met a therapist, despite their qualification, who has not been impressed by what they've learned in the NLP or the hypnosis side. Okay. Some other comments there. Okay. Good. And of course, I have no idea what your base of knowledge is here, but those few little tips are things you might be able to do moving into the future. I hope this has been useful for you. By the way, we have a 3-hour NLP Essentials evening coming up. It's $47, I believe. If you want another little taster, but you actually want a face-to-face, you want to be able to ask questions, you want to learn something solid, then we have this in Sydney at the, I believe it's the Grace Hotel. So talk to our people in the office and we can book you in. It starts at 6 o'clock at night. It is the 29th of August, a Thursday, 6 till 9. If you, this is a fair commitment. NLP, hypnosis, they're all fair commitments. It's a good idea to get a little bit of a taster if you can. So find the time if this is something worth pursuing, and I think it is. You know, I think everyone, here's my bias, everyone should do NLP, everyone. Every child, every teenager should know that they don't have to listen to every thought they have. Okay, hopefully that's been useful. I wish you all a good night.